Shavua Tov.
There I am, I think. How are you, Mario?
Baruch Hashem. Longest 3 days, but how are you?
It was definitely long. I know the show's having something else at the same time, so I don't know how.
I just saw that.
I mean, they asked me. I thought this was a good time, so I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I think it is a good time. I don't know. We'll see who else is going to join.
Yep, we can give
If
them
anyone.
we can give them a couple minutes, or we could just learn.
Of course. No, let's give it a couple of minutes. It's fine.
I'm not. I thought we would do some of the previous stuff because I know that we missed it. But let's see what time we start.
Okay. So were your kids excited for Pesach?
They were, it's challenging. I mean, they're great. They've been really good about it, and it was really fun to be together as a family.
Yeah.
But we missed the rest of the family as
right. How's your mom doing?
She's good. So she was going to come to us initially.
Right. I remember that.
But she was home alone. I have a bunch of siblings who live near her, but they didn't go to her for Seder, but they visited, I think.
Right.
From a distance. But she's pretty good. I mean, she unfortunately had a second surgery, I think I told you about, and then.
Right, I remember.
Right, so it's been pretty rough. She's had a lot of pain after that, but she's healing. She's off antibiotics now before Pesach.
Oh, okay. So that's progress.
So that's the good news.
Good.
Yeah.
Just heard my brother just posted that they are loosening the confinement in Israel. They're allowing special ed children to go back to school next week. And then they're allowing, I don't know what he wrote, about barbers and beauty salons to open up.
Essential.
And then, I don't know, finance and something else. I don't know.
Interesting. Are they making people get tested, or they're just...
I don't know. I mean, he just posted a synopsis of some kind of article, and then he put the link. I didn't have time to read it, so.
Yeah, no, we're very eager to see what's going to open up here when the kids could go back to school more than anything.
I don't think your kids are going back to school this year.
Oh no, I'm trying not to admit that.
I think the mayor just announced that public schools are not going.
I just saw that. We didn't have that information. We speculated all Yom Tov. I was like, May 1st,
No, it's just I don't know. New York has been hit pretty hard, so.
Yeah, no, I think the question is really, unfortunately, well, anyways, who knows? It's definitely getting a little better, but it's pretty horrible, so.
Yeah, what have you been doing? Have you been able to do any kind of work?
So I go in not most days, like 3 or 4 times a week, so more than half. Patients, we still give chemo, but we've cut back a lot of people, especially elderly people.
Right.
Which is tricky. They all want to get their people who are doing well with treatment for a very bad cancer. They want to continue. Surgeries have been cut back tremendously, so we've had to make changes.
Right.
But I think our hospital, my understanding is the hospital is starting it has hit its peak. And so we're optimistic that they'll let us start doing more things.
Mm-hmm.
The surgeries will probably pick up, my guess is in May, after this month.
Right.
The question is, we're not having visitors, right? So we're trying to reduce traffic. And the question is, and when is it worth coming? We're doing a lot of telemedicine, which is not that good for cancer patients.
No, obviously.
There's no question. So the question is, well, what's the risk? With trade-off and risk. And a lot of people travel very far to come to us. So we've cut back a lot on that.
Mm-hmm.
People who come for clinical trials or come for a reason.
Right. Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, I just bumped into someone on the street, when I go for a walk every day, because otherwise I go crazy. I didn't over the Chag because it was cold and whatever. But so I guess it was Erev Chag, and I went out, and there was this couple. She is a pediatric oncologist, and she was just assigned to a COVID floor for adults, and she was told, buff up on whatever it is that and get on with it. It's okay.
It's a challenge. Let's learn. We have Hanan, so we can.
Okay, so what daf are you going to learn?
Well, let's do this. I think we'll get through it. I think it's not that hard at all, and it's actually interesting. Well, it's all interesting, but today's daf is daf Lamed Vav, but I'm going to start from Lamed Hey on the bet. Around 10 lines down, there's 2 dots. Tang Rabbanan. So we weren't able to learn over Yom Tif, unfortunately, but let's try this. I think we're going to still miss something, but at least we can learn some of yesterday's daf. So
Okay, so that's the last daf in the first art scroll actually.
Lamed Hey. Oh, so you don't have it?
No, Lamed Vav. Oh, you said Lamed Hey.
So today is Lamed Vav, but I'm going to do some of Lamed Hey, a lot of Lamed Hey.
Okay, yep,
That's the
right
bonus,
here.
the Chol HaMoed bonus. So Hanan, you got it around 10 lines down, the middle of a line, Taner Rabban. So it says the Braita. This is a very good ending to the second parak, which all talked about preparing for Shabbos. Sheish Tkiyot Tokin Erev Shabbat. They would blow the shofar 6 times in the lead up to Shabbat, on Erev Shabbat. Rishona, the first call is to tell people Lahaftilat Ami Malacha Shelasadot. That people working in the fields, which were outside of the city, who, obviously they worked 5 days a week. Probably, I take it back. They worked 6 days a week. The people in the fields had to stop doing work and they had to get in, which might have taken a while. It wasn't that far. They heard it, but let's say it took a half hour or whatever to gather up their stuff and come in. So that was the first call. Shniya was lahaftil ir v'chanuyot. It's to tell people who work in the city and people who work in the stores to stop working. So again, the Gemara doesn't say how long it is, but you have to use your, seichel. It's maybe a half hour later or whatever the time is. Shlishit, the third call is to tell people hadliket haner. It's time to light ner for Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, no, I disagree with that. Shlishit is lachlotz tefillin. The third is for you to take off your tefillin. They used to wear tefillin all day, and you don't wear tefillin on Shabbat. As we're going to discuss it later. So that's the third call. It means it's time for Shabbat. Take off your tefillin. Put on your suit, basically. Rashi understands that therefore Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you don't have to light the candles until you hear the fourth call. So the third call is not time yet to light the candles. It's only the fourth one. Then, this is the important part, after the third tkiyah, they would wait a little bit. Shoheh, they would wait, kedei tzliyat dag katan, the amount of time it takes to roast a small fish. Meaning, you would look around your kitchen, you'd say, I'm a little bit short for shalosh shudas, right? So let me make one last thing. Microwave popcorn nowadays. Oh, kedei lahadbik pat betanur, to make one last loaf in the oven. That's we're going to talk about this in this Masechet a lot, but the way they made bread in those days was like they make today in Israel in what's it called, the pitas, right? You have a tanur is an oven. The whole thing's heated up. You attach the bread to the sidewall, and it expands. It's very fast, of course, right? The oven's very quick. So you would wait a few minutes. People could do last minute preparations, what we would call setting our timers nowadays, right? And then the last three, tokeya, umeria, vitokeya. They would blow 3 more together, tkiya, trua, tekiya, and then shovet, and then everyone stops. That's the sign that it's Shabbos. So those are the 6. Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in a Braita, ma naselem bavliim. What can we do about these Babylonians? Remember, Shimon Gamliel was long before the Jews had moved to Bavel, right? There were some Jews in Bavel, but it was in time long before the big exile. But it says of Shimon Gamliel, what do we do about these Babylonians? They just blow it twice. They do Tkiya and Trua, and then they stop and they rest. They don't really know how to count. Shoftim mitoch Marian. What does Reb Shimon Gamliel mean? Tokin Marian, then it's only 5. Havele Chamisha. They only blow 2 more calls. Ella, what they did in Bavel, they would be Tokin, v'chozrin v'tokin, umerian, v'shoftim mitoch Marian. They would blow a Tkiya as number 4, a Tkiya as number 5, and then a Trua as number 6, and they would stop working during the Trua. That was just their, that was their cadence. And says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, minhag avotem biyadeihem. That's how they do it. That's how they blow the trumpet in Bavel. But it's the same concept, basically. So, therefore, this is the right. This is how you prepare for Shabbat. These are the 6 calls. Now, Matni le Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yitzchak Bray, Rabbi Yehuda told Rabbi Yitzchak, his son, that Shniya lahadliket haner, that the second call is when you light the candles. Now, that's what, it's not like any opinion. Kiman Lok Reb Natan, who said it's the third one. Lok Reb Yehuda Hanasi, who said it's the fourth one. This is where you're right. And that's not what he said. He said, Elo Shlishit lahadliket haner. He told his son, you should light the candle with the third Tkiya, Kiman Rabbi Natan, and that is going according to Rabbi Natan. That's how he passed it. Now continues another Braita, the same concept. Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, they taught in the Braita of Rabbi Yishmael, Sheish Tkiyot Tokin Erev Shabbat. They would blow 6 tkiot on Erev Shabbat. Hitchil l'tkoa tkiya rishona. You got your back, Hannah? Okay. They would blow 6 tkiot on Erev Shabbat. The first one, the Hitchil l'tkoa tkiya rishona, nimneu ha'omdim basada mila'ador u'milachrosh. The people who worked in the fields would stop being ader. There's a hoeing, right? I think aders, right? Making rows. I'm not very good with agriculture, but they would stop with la'ador u'milachrosh and plowing. U'milasot kol melacha shebesadot. They would stop doing all the work in the field. But importantly, this is a very interesting halacha. Eina krovim r'shayim likanes ad shevo rechokim. The people who were working in the close fields were not allowed to come in until the people from the distant fields caught up to them. Why not? So Rashi explains that because it would be maradayim. Because people would think that, we don't know who works in the distant field and the close field, but if you see a farmer coming in and then 20 minutes later you see another one coming in, you're going to think that the guy who came in second, he, didn't want to stop working for Shabbos. He wanted to get some extra stuff done. He was delaying. And so everyone has to wait until they all gather together and come in together. So that all the farmers have to have some solidarity. They all come in together. They should all come in together. Still the stores are open. Trisim munachim, the trisim. I don't know how you translate trisim. The gates are up, right? Because I guess if people are coming in from the fields, they're going to buy last minute stuff, pick up your flowers. Once they blew the second tkiya, then they would take away the gates, meaning they would close the gates, and they would lock the stores. Still, you would have your pots, which is going to be the subject of today's daf. You'd have your pots cooking on the flame. Kira is a stove. Right? You'd have your pots, and your chamin is your hot water, and your kedera, your cholent, your meat on the kira. When they blew the third tkiya, then you have to take your food off the fire, which again we're going to discuss in today's daf and for the next few weeks. Silak hamisalek, you would take off the food on the fire. Hitmin hamatmin, you would tatmana, remember, is insulation, right? So you would put towels or insulation material around the things you wanted to keep hot for Shabbos. And then you would be hidlik hamadlik, you would light the candles, which is what Rabbi Natan said. The shoah kedates the dad katan o kedei lahadbik pat b'tanur. You would wait a short amount of time to make final things, right? You make your small fish or your bread, and then you would blow the last three. V'tokea Maria v'tokea v'shovet. You would blow tkiya, true tkiya, and then it'll be Shabbat.
How did they know when to blow it?
That's a good question. They would probably have, they would have. So which part are you asking on? How they know when it's going to be?
Like the first one. Check the watches. What? Sundials.
It's a good question. I assume that the last ones they would definitely time it so it'll be very close to Shkia, right?
Right. But let's say it was rainy, or it was. Just had to kind of like eyeball it, or
yeah. I think they would have to eyeball it. I think it would be, it's likely, we're going to discuss this in a second, but it's not going to be a complete answer. But I think they would have to, I don't think it was the same time every week, right? They'd have to assume X amount of time to get in from the fields. And once the people were in and the stores were there, they would blow the second one. But the final one has to be before Shkia, of course, right?
Right. So you think the first one was maybe like an hour before Shkia or something?
Yeah, I don't really know how long it takes to get in from the field, but there is an Inyan, we're going to see this throughout, that you have to be careful not to do it too early, right? We talked about this earlier. You're not supposed to light the candles too early. Right. But yeah, I think it was totally based on practicalities in the beginning part. The first three, you gave people time to do X, and then you'd wait a little even after they lit the candles, and then you do Tkiya. I think when we discussed, I don't know how much we learned over the holidays, Ben Hashmash's Gemaras, where discussing about how we knew about this, and they were asked, what do you do about people who don't know? But they had some expertise, but obviously they didn't have clocks, right? So there was no way to know when Shkia was if it was cloudy. That's the reality.
Is this Beit Din, or like these were just people who were appointed to?
So we're going to see in a second. I mean, it was a communal responsibility. Like, so this is like something that falls on the community to do this, to assign someone, to give them the job, it's not just each individual. It's a
Right,
community.
no, of course, right, it's communal, yeah.
Continues the Gemara, but on that vein, which you'll see why. I mean, the Gemara goes to a similar question to yours, but it's another nuance of it. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina said, Shamati, I heard, meaning I was taught, that if you didn't light your Shabbos candles and they blew the last blast, we said you're supposed to keep Shabbos, you can still light your candles. You get a few extra minutes, like our 18 minutes kind of thing.
Right.
Why? Right, the Chachamim had to have the person doing this blow the shofar before Shkia actually came. Because after he blew the shofar is muksa, he had to walk home with the shofar. So clearly they had to allow a few minutes for that to happen. And so therefore there's a little bit of time. How much? Not much, right? I don't know how much, but there's a few minutes. It's not like he would blow it at the last possible second. It would be a little bit of extra time. Amrlo, they said to Rabbi Yossi, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, sorry, 1 second, guys. Im Kain, because if that's the case, you're then giving it up to a time which is not predictable. Because who knows, right? So the Chazan might live next door to the shul. He might live across the street. He might live 5 minutes away. How could the Chachamim say there's an amount of time? We don't know how much that time is. Ella, what must have happened, Makom Tanua Yeshla, the Chazan Knesset, the Rosh Gago. The Chazan Knesset had a place that he hid it. He had a hiding spot on top of the roof. Shesham Miniach Shofro, you could there put the shofar after you blew it. But that you would blow the shofar at the last possible minute, and then people should stop immediately after you blow the shofar. But the Chazan would then hide it right away. And the reason is, you can't carry on Shabbat, lo et shofar, lo et chatzotrot. You can't carry a shofar or a chatzotrot. Rashi explains the difference between a shofar and a chatzotrot is that one is curved and one is straight. So you can't carry either a curved item or a curved horn or a straight horn. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Vatanya, we learned in a different brayta that shofar mitatal, you can carry a curved horn on Shabbat, but chatzotrot eino mitaltalin. You can't carry a straight one. And the reason, of course, is that a curved one has the benefit that you can use it if you want to have like a kiddush club or something, right? You can put some schnapps in your curved shofar and it can hold it for you, right? A straight shofar, of course, you can't do anything. It'll come right out. So you can use a curved shofar to carry some liquid. Rav Yossi, Lokasha, Kam Yachid, Kam Betzibor. You're right. One bright that says you can't carry a shofar, and one bright that says you can. So the difference is whether it's an individual or a tzibor. If it's an individual, you're going to use it. For a tzibor, you're not carrying around liquid for a tzibor, and therefore the shofar of the tzibor is muktzah.
That's why we don't blow it on Rosh Hashanah?
You can do, so first of all, it's not Shabbat. We don't blow it on Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah, but that's a different reason.
But I thought it had to do with
But then it has a function, right? So on Rosh Hashanah, if you're blowing it you're not allowed to blow a shofar you don't blow a shofar on Shabbat, as we know.
I thought that's because you can't carry it or something.
It's true, but you don't blow a shofar for a mitzvah on Shabbat, right? But you don't blow a shofar in general because we don't make noise on Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
So outside of Rosh Hashanah, you wouldn't blow a shofar, and so therefore it's muksa. But here, the yachid, you can carry a shofar, presumably, according to this, because you can use it if you want to use it for liquid. I'm like Abaya, said Abaya, ubi yachid l'may chazi. I don't understand. If you're an individual with the shofar, why are you allowed to carry it on Shabbat? What function does it have? Oh, because you can put some water into it, latino, for your kid. Right? You use it like your kid's very thirsty, you can put some water in and feed them, right? They can't drink out of a big cup maybe, but they can sip out of a shofar. That was pretty disgusting. But anyways, the tzibor nami chazil gameh tinokani, a tzibor also has a responsibility. You would say a tzibor doesn't need to feed a kid, but a tzibor does have a responsibility to feed a poor child, right, an orphan or whatever. And if that's the case, then the tzibor might need a shofar that's curved. And furthermore, so it should not be muksa. And furthermore, at the Tanya, there's another brayta which says straight out, this brayta says specifically you can carry both. You can carry a shofar, a curved horn, and you can carry a straight horn. So it must be that there's a debate. You can't explain all these braitot to mean the same thing. Ella says, well, you're right. It's a machloket, which is, you remember, not always our first choice. We don't like things to be arguments. But lo kasha, the braitot are not contradicting each other. They represent three different opinions about muktzah on Shabbat. The first one, which said that you can carry a curved shofar, but not a straight chatzotzrot, that's Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you're not allowed to carry things that are muktzah, but if there's a function, such as carrying a little bit of water for a kid, you're allowed to carry it, even though it's not the primary function of the shofar. Ha Rabbi Shimon, the Braita which said you can carry both is Rabbi Shimon, because as we're going to learn in this Masechet, Rabbi Shimon does not hold of muktzah, so he holds there's no such thing as muktzah. Well, it's not so simple, of course, but we'll get there. And Ha Rabbi Nechemia, the Braita which says you can't carry either of them is Rabbi Nechemia. And Rabbi Nechemia is of the opinion that not only is muktzah a problem, but even things that you have a function for, if it's not the primary function, you're not allowed to use it. So since the shofar's primary function is to blow, even if you have a secondary function of carrying a little water, or our famous example, right, the hammer. A hammer's function is to build, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. But even though a hammer can also be used to, break open a melon, let's say, or hold a door open, according to Rabbi Nechemia, you're not allowed to carry it for that purpose, even though according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can. Ask the Gemara now. I don't understand, though. Why would Rabbi Nechemia say you can't carry lo et shofar, lo et chatzotzrot, right, which is what the Braita said. You can't carry a shofar, which is curved, and you can't carry one that's straight. If the curved one should be more easy to carry, because the curved one has a function. The function is that you can put water. How could he say not a shofar and not a chatzotzrot? Says Gemara, the way you'd have to understand it is that my shofar nami chatzotzrot, that in fact in Rabbi Nechemia's place, in his Braita, the word shofar does not mean the word shofar. It means chatzotzrot. The word chatzotzrot means shofar, meaning they changed the names. Why? Kid Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda, as Rav Chisda said, a couple generations later, Hani tlat mili, the following three things, ishtani shamayu michichar Beit HaMikdash. Once after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, I don't know if it's related specifically, but just, at this point in time, their names were changed. They were called something different. What are they? Chatzotra, chatzotzrata, shofra. We started calling a chatzotra a shofar, and a shofra we started be calling a chatzotzrata, right? So when Rabbi Nechemia said, the Braita says that you can't blow a shofar, it meant a chatzotra, a straight one. And it says you can't blow a chatzotra, it meant a shofar. The Mai Nafkamina. Now, why do you need to know if they changed the name? The shofar shel Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, remember we learned, or we will learn soon enough, in Rosh Hashanah that you're not allowed to blow, that the shofar of Rosh Hashanah has to be curved. And so, remember, because we talked about Rosh Hashanah, you're supposed to be humble, you're supposed to bend over, shofar of the aisle. So it's important to know that when we say what you should blow on Rosh Hashanah is that you should blow a curved one, which nowadays is what we call chatzotzrata.
Thought they called it a shofar before. Right.
So that's the point, is we changed the name. But in one Braita we had the old name, one Braita we have the new name, just to confuse you.
Okay.
I think no other real good explanation. The next thing is that an arava is now called a tzaftzfa, and a tzaftzfa is called an arava. And Sukkah goes through that arava, which is what we're supposed to use on Sukkahs, has elongated leaves. And a tzaftzfa has round leaves. It's also a willow, but it's a different kind of willow that has round leaves. And an arava has a red stem, and a tzaftzfa has a white stem. So the arava was changed the name to tzaftzfa, and tzaftzfa is now called arava. And the minaf can be a lulav, so you should know which one to use in a lulav. You should use the one that we used to be called an arava, which is now called a tzaftzfa. And third is that the city of Ptorah is now called Ptorata, which is the diminutive, right? So Ptorata is like a small city next to Ptorah. Ptorah is now called Ptorata, and Ptorata is called Ptorah. They just changed the name of these cities. The Mainafkim, if you're doing business and you want to buy a plot of land in Ptorah, you should know that you're going to get a piece of land in Ptorata, because they changed the name. Amar Abaya said, Abaya af anu nomar. We also have another example of Hovlila Bekasi. The Hovlila, which is the second, or I guess the third stomach of the cow, is now what we call bekasi, which is the fourth stomach of the cow. And the bekasi is hovlila. Again, they changed the names for the different stomachs of the cow. And the Ma'inaf Gamina, why does that matter? As we learned in Chulin, there's a halacha that if you have a mechet, beit hakosot, if you find, which is bekasi, but if you find a needle in the wall of the third stomach, then if it's making a hole in tzad echad, if it's making a hole through one side of the wall, it's kshira. It's not a treifa, because it didn't necessarily go through the other side. But in mishnei tzadim, if it's going through both sides, then it's treifa. And as we've learned in the Chulin, that's because that segment of the stomach is a very thick wall. It's two layer connected by fat. And so you can have a needle that goes through one side, but doesn't puncture through the other side, and therefore doesn't make it a treifa. But the next segment of the stomach is much thinner, and if you have a needle that goes through one side, even if you don't see the hole in the second side, you know it had to have gone through, and it's automatically a treifa. Either way, just another example.
There were a lot of cities that the names got changed. I mean, the Romans changed the names of,
I agree.
Like one city.
You can add to this list, but I don't know why, I don't know where these cities are, but obviously it was something that was on their list. It says, here's another example. Amar Vashi, Afani, Anu Namar, we also say Bavel is now called Borsif. I don't know if someone is in English what Borsif is. But Bavel is called Borsif, and Borsif is called Bavel. And again, these are just different countries would change their name. The Ma'inaf Gamina, why does that matter? Legite Nashim. In terms of a get, Rashi has two explanations, but I'll do the second one. The second one is that, of course, you want to write in the get the name of the current name of the city. And so you have to write what it's called nowadays, which, of course, has tremendously relevant applications nowadays, right? If you come from Leningrad and they call it something else or whatever.
St. Petersburg.
Etc. You have to keep up with the name in the current day. And that's the halacha here, which is that if they change the name, you don't use the original name, or the name was when you were married or when you were born. You go with the current name, and this, of course, is a huge issue of debate nowadays when there are countries that have vague names. Like, what do you call the former Soviet Union? What do you call, how do you refer to some of these places? And obviously, the rabbis deal with these issues in the proper time.
What is this whole Tosafot? It's on the Muktzah stuff? Or?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. This one, huge one. Yeah, Reb Nechemia has to do a lot with Muktzah. Anyway, we'll discuss Muktzah, don't worry.
That's okay, that's fun.
Okay, now let's get started. We're not going to get too far because one of my kids is crying behind me. I think I'm going to have to go attend to, but that's the perils of learning from home. But let's get started in really the meat of Masechet Shabbat, which is cooking, right? And so this parakira is going to occupy us for a while. But just again, to recall, I think we've discussed this before, but akira, again, I don't know how these translate into English. Tanur, which is something that we're very familiar with, right? So a tanur is an oven where essentially you heat up the inside or you heat up underneath, and you bake by attaching things to the wall of the oven, essentially.
Yeah.
A kira is something where you cook on top of it. A stovetop, basically, right? So that's what a kira is. I don't know how they translate it in English, but it's essentially a stovetop. So you have a container made out of whatever it's made out of. I don't know if it's specifically made out of cheres or it could be made out of earthenware, which is earthenware. It could be probably made out of stone. I don't know what it was made out of, but you would put a fuel source into the stove. You would put the pot on top. It was flat on top. Okay. We're going to see later there was another stove that had two spots, but a kira usually has one spot. But anyways, that's a detail which we'll discuss as we get on. So let's say you have a kira and your hisikuha, you means you burned to heat it up with kash uvava. Kash uvava is stubble and hay, right? So things that are very flammable but don't last very long. I mean, they don't really form into coals, right? They just burn up, like newspaper. Okay, obviously that's not what they used. But kasher vava, then notin alet tafshil. You could put a pot on this. Let me just assume, even though this is going to be a debate, you could put a tafshil on this oven before Shabbat starts, because the fuel is going to burn up real quickly. It's not going to get hotter and hotter. It just gets colder and colder as you burn up the fuel, meaning you lose heat. And so there's no worry that you're going to do anything to it, because you can't do anything. You can't make it hotter. But if it's begefet, ube'etzim, if you use something that has carbon in it and will burn and will basically make a coal, so gefet, Rashi says, is the psolet, the leftovers from sesame seeds, okay? Which, again, the seeds, you crush them to get sesame oil, but you got the seeds in them. Or eitzim, of course, is wood. Then, lo yitain ad sheyigrof, ad sheyitain at efer. You shouldn't put your food on this kira before Shabbat. Again, that's how I'm reading it now. The Gemara will ask if that's the right way to read it. Unless you are yigrof, which literally means you clear it out, you shovel it out, right? You take out the coals. Oh, ad sheyitain at efer, you cover them with dirt. Aver's not dirt, ash, right? You cover them with ash. So why not? So Rashi understands, and this is a humongous debate and has huge implications for what we do every Shabbos, that the primary reason is because we're worried Shema Yechateh B'Gechalim. You might stoke the coals. You put your food on this, Shabbos comes, your soup is not that hot. You might be tempted to move around the coals or blow them a little bit to make them hotter, and therefore make your food hotter. And that would, of course, be called bishul on Shabbat. That's like turning up the flame. And so we don't want you to do that, and therefore we want you to clear them out or cover them. Now, as many people point out, even if you cover them, you can still probably uncover them, right? But the point is that you want to make some symbol to remember that you're not supposed to touch these coals, which is probably what our is essentially. Okay. Again, it's much more complicated than that, but we're going to start with that. Okay. Continues the Mishnah. Beit Shammai omrim chamin. Now, if you cover these coals, you can heat up only hot water, avolot tavshil, but not actually a dish of food. And the reason being that hot water, it's hot. There's no real point in making it hotter. But a dish, you might want to keep cooking, and it gets better the more you cook it. And therefore, you're going to be tempted to stoke the coals, even if you cover them. Beit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. Beit Hillel says, no. Once you cover the coals, you can leave either hot water or a stew on top of the kira. Beit Shammai omrim, the Gemara is going to be bothered by these words. Beit Shammai says, notlin, you can take food off the kira on Shabbat, which of course seems pretty obvious, but okay. Avalom machzirin, but you can't place it back, even if it's covered. Beit Hillel omrin af machzirin. And Beit Hillel says, no, you can even put the food back, of course, as long as the coals are covered. Okay? That's called hachsara. Ask the Gemara. Now, I don't understand the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, again, I'm going to read the first words in the Mishnah. Kira, you have an oven. I'm using the oven. You could say stovetop. That was hisiku b'kasha b'vava, notnin, right? But if it's tafshil, but if you use gefet and eitzim, lo yitain ad sheyigrof. You shouldn't put, the literal meaning is, don't put food on it until you've cleared it out. And when are you putting this food on it, right?
Right. Well, if you clear it out, it's not going to warm up. Or it's not going to warm up.
Hot, right? If there's heat inside.
I see.
Or no. Again, clearing out might just mean clearing it to the side, not necessarily taking it out of the oven.
Oh, okay.
So I've been trying to be vague about that, to be honest. But even if you clear it out, I mean, the oven is hot, or you heated it up, just to take out the coals.
Okay. Maybe the thinking was wrong.
Okay. Ibaylo. The question they first asked was, "Hi lo yitain." When it says don't put something on it unless you clear it out, unless you cover it, is that lo yachziru? Meaning, if you take your chicken off on Shabbat, you shouldn't put it back unless the coals are covered. Avol lishot mashin. But if you put your chicken on the fire before Shabbat, even if the coals are uncovered, maybe you can leave it on, once Shabbat starts, because you haven't done anything. You're not putting it back on. Even though you haven't covered them up the coals and you haven't cleared them out. And if that was the case, who's our Mishnah money? Who's our Mishnah Chananya? Maybe that's the opinion of Chananya. The Tanya Chananya Omer, and this is how we paskin in some way, that kol shehu kemachal ben drusai, any food that's already cooked and it's edible, use machal ben drusai to mean edible. Ben drusai, Rashi says, always were these robbers who, they were always in a rush. So they would cook their food minimally and then wolf it down. But it was cooked enough for them to eat. It wasn't raw, but it was minimally cooked. A third cooked is how we paskin, or, well, not necessarily. Some say a third, some say a half cooked. But, once food is edible, mutter l'shhoto al gabi kira, you can leave it on top of your stove on when Shabbat starts. Even though it hasn't been covered, the coals have not been covered. Why? Because it's already cooked. And because it's already cooked, our concern that you're going to move the coals to make it cook more is very low. And since our concern is very low, we're allowed to leave it there when Shabbat starts. So maybe that's what the Mishnah is saying. That when it's saying you can't put food on the oven, it means you can't put food on the stove if you took it off on Shabbat. You can't put it back. Lo yachzir. But to leave it there when Shabbat starts, you can leave it there even if the coals are not covered, even if it's not garufu katum. Or, that's one possibility. Odilma, or maybe what the Mishnah is saying, is that lishhotzna. That when it says lo yitain, it means don't leave it there, not don't place it there. Don't leave it there when Shabbat starts unless the coals are covered. The garufu katum in, if the coals are covered, then you can leave food there when Shabbat starts, lo. But if you haven't covered the coals, you can't leave your chicken soup on the stove if you haven't covered the coals, even if it was there from before Shabbat, and even if it's already cooked mostly. And kol shekain lachzir, but certainly you can't put it back on Shabbat. So that's the fundamental question we ask first, right? Is our Mishnah referring to leaving food on, saying you can't leave it on when Shabbat starts unless you cover the coals? Or is it saying, sure, you can leave it on when Shabbat starts even if the coals are not covered, but you can't put it back on Shabbat unless the coals are covered? That's the question. So Tashma, let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. Right? Our Mishnah had two different cases. What are the two different cases? Beit Shammai omin chamin avalot tavshil, that if you cover the coals, you can leave on hot water, but you can't leave on a stew. And Beit Hillel said chamin vit tavshil. That was one argument. And the second argument was Beit Shammai omrim notlin, you can take food off the fire, off the oven, not the fire, off the stovetop, avalo machzirim, but you can't put it back. And Beit Hillel omrim af machzirim. Now, I don't understand. What's Beit Hillel adding here? So, if the Mishnah is only talking initially about whether or not you can leave food on the fire, meaning not can you put it back, but everybody agrees you can leave it on. So there's a debate even whether you can leave it on when Shabbat starts. So then hachikatani, then I understand the whole Mishnah. And this is how you would read the Mishnah. Now we're going to go from top to bottom now. Hachikatani. Kira, if you have a stove, shesiku b'kashuk vava, you heated it up with flax or whatever the words are, but hay, grass, then mashin aleh tavshil. Then you can leave your tavshil on it when Shabbat starts, because we're not worried you're going to move around that fuel source, because moving it around, it's not really coals, it's not really going to get hotter. If you use gefet ve'etzim, if you use things that might get hotter if you move them around, or more intense heat, then lo yisheh, you shouldn't leave things on when Shabbat starts, unless you're yigruf or nefer, unless you clear out the coals or you cover them with dirt. Uma hein mashin. Now, if you do cover the coals, what are you allowed to leave on when Shabbat starts? Then that's where Beit Shammai says chamin, only water, avalot tavshil, but not food. Beit Hillel says no, both chamin vit tavshil, and continues the Mishnah, meaning paraphrasing. In fact, not only are they arguing about leaving it on when Shabbat starts, but the same argument of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel applies to put food back on. And that is Beit Shammai omrim notlin, you can take food off an oven on Shabbat, but you can never put it back, even if the coals are covered. And Beit Hillel says, no. If the coals are covered, you can leave it on when Shabbat starts, and af machzirin, you can also put it back on. So if the beginning of the Mishnah was talking about where you left food on when Shabbat starts, then I understand the end part of the Mishnah is saying, and the same argument extends according to Beit Shammai, according to Beit Hillel, to also putting it back. So just like you can leave it on, Beit Hillel says you can put it back on Shabbat if the coals are covered. And Beit Shammai says, no, you can't. You can only leave it on, you can't put it back. Then the Mishnah makes sense. But if you read the whole Mishnah, that the first part of the Mishnah was talking about putting food back on Shabbat, and if that's the first part of the Mishnah, what's Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel arguing about in the last part of the Mishnah, right? So let's read that. If the first part of the Mishnah was referring to putting food back on the fire, not back on the fire, but back on the fire, not back on the fire, back on the stovetop, after Shabbat started, as long as the coals were covered, then hachiktani. This is how you have to read the Mishnah. Kira shesiku bekashuk vava. If you have a stove that was heated with kashuk vava, then machzirin alav tavshil. You can put a pot that's cooked back on it on Shabbat because it's already cooked and we're not worried that you're going to touch the flames. But if you use gefet ve'etzim, which are coals, then lo yachzir. You shouldn't put food back on it on Shabbat unless you clear out the coals or you put some dirt on top of them. And continues the Mishnah then, umahein machzirin. What do you put back on? What can you put back on as long as the coals are covered? Beit Shammai omrim chamin. You could put on water because it's already hot. You're not worried it's going to get hotter. Avalo tavshil, but not a dish. Ubeit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. But Beit Hillel says, no, you can put both back on it. And then the last part of the Mishnah makes no sense because the last part would then be Beit Shammai omrim notlin. You can put things, take things off the flame, off the oven. Avalo machzirin, but you can't ever put them back on. Ubeit Hillel omrim af machzirin hatu lamali. That's the exact same thing you argued about in the Reisha. Again, if the Reisha was talking about putting things back on, we already heard about the Machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Why is it repeated? And so we are bothered that, we're trying to prove from our Mishnah that it has to be talking about, the Mishnah was saying you can leave food on the oven when Shabbat starts only if you've cleared out the coals or covered them. But if you haven't, you can't even leave it on when Shabbat starts. And that's how the whole Mishnah is read. Now, that seems to be pretty clear from our Mishnah, right? Now, the Gemara says today, we'll just do the top lines here in a few more minutes. La'olam ema lecha lahachzir tana. You know, we can always tell you that the Mishnah is actually referring to putting things back on Shabbat, but if you left it there before Shabbat started, it's not a problem and you don't even have to cover the coals. And we just have to add a few words into the Mishnah. The chasurin mechasar v'achi ketani. You have to add in some words to the Mishnah, and it'll make much more sense. Now, Tosfos is always bothered. Why would we try to add words to the Mishnah? Right? You had two ways to read the Mishnah. One was that the Mishnah was talking about leaving food on before Shabbat started. The Mishnah was saying you can't leave food on unless you cover the coals. The second is that the Mishnah is only talking about putting food back on after Shabbat started and saying you can't put food back on unless you cover the coals, but you can leave it on even if the coals aren't covered. And the Gemara said the Mishnah was very fine if you learned it one way, but now we're changing the Mishnah to add words to make it work the other way. Why would we go to all that effort? Tosfos says that often we do this because we paskin that way, right? So the rabbis concluded the halacha is like Chananya, that in fact you can leave food on the fire even if the coals are not covered, and therefore we want to go out of our way to read our Mishnah in a way that's consistent with that opinion. And that's sort of, we had the pressure to do that. And therefore, we add words to the Mishnah. The Chasurim Mechasra, or at least we read the Mishnah as if these words were there. And now you should read the Mishnah in this creative way. So we're at the second line. The Mishnah should be read the following way. Kira, you have an oven. Shesikua bekashuk vava, you heated it up with kash and vava. Then you can be machzir of tavshil. You can put a food stuff back on it even on Shabbat because it's already cooked, like Hananya would say, and there's no problem putting it back on and letting it get heated up. But if the oven was heated with gefet ve'etzim, which are things that make coals basically, then lo yachzir, you shouldn't put food back on Shabbat, even if it's cooked, until you clear out the coals so that you're not going to touch them, or you cover them with dirt. But to leave food on when Shabbat starts, you can be mashin, you can leave it on the coals. And then continues the Mishnah, this is what he's adding. What kind of foods can you leave on when Shabbat starts? Beit Shammai says chamin, only liquids. Avalo tavshil. Ubeit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. You can do both. And continues the Mishnah. Again, we're adding in these sort of explanations. Hach chazara da'amar lecha. When I said to you in the Mishnah that you're allowed to put food back on Shabbat if you covered the coals, no, that's lav divrei hakoli. That's not in fact the opinion of everybody. That in fact is a machlokes Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim, Beit Shammai says you can be notel, you can take food off on Shabbat, but you can never put it back on even if the coals are covered. And Beit Hillel omrim af machzirin. so that the Mishnah is really referring to only Chazara, and it's really repetitive. But the end of the Mishnah is saying, don't make the mistake of thinking this goes according to everybody. It only goes according to Beit Hillel. But at the end of the day, the way we read the Mishnah according to this is that no matter everybody agrees that you don't even have to cover the coals if you want to leave food on from before Shabbat. As long as the food was cooked, which is a very important detail, you can leave it on a flame that has coals as long as you have cooked it before Shabbat and you, of course, don't touch it on Shabbat, but you can leave it on from before Shabbat and you allow it to continue to cook, even if you haven't covered the coals. And that's how we're going to stop today from that reading of the Mishnah. We will continue this very, very much tomorrow, God willing. Okay?
Shikach, 7:30.
Complicated stuff. 7:30 tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Okay?
Good
Shabbat tov.
to be back.
I agree.
Yes. Take care. All right.